Welcome back to A Minute with Alan. This is the Chimney story. Last year, I'm settled in front of the television, fireplace roaring beside me, late in the year, and I'm watching football, sitting on the couch. And I noticed after a while that the screen was sort of hazy. And as I looked around, there was smoke from the fireplace coming through the lighting outlets in the ceiling, the receptacles. Now, I'm a man watching football, so how serious was this? I mean, could this have waited till the end of the game? But I decided I couldn't, beginning to choke a bit. So I went in the kitchen, picked up the phone, went on the computer, looked up chimney specialists, and there were several. And so the first one I called said, yes, we can take care of that. You probably have a leak somewhere, and we're adept at that. I said, what does it entail? He says, well, we take the chimney apart brick by brick. We label them. We know exactly where they go back. And that's $5,000. I said, well, what about fixing it? He said, well, we should find the leak by that time. And then when we put the bricks back, it's another $5,000. I said, what if you put the bricks back and you haven't fixed the leak? He said, well, called another guy. He said, we use acoustic sounding. I said, acoustic sounding. That sounds very good. I said, what do you do? He said, well, we knock on the walls. We knock on the bricks outside with special implements. And we try to determine if we're getting a sound that doesn't quite make sense. I said, what if you don't get a different sound in one place or another? He said, then we take the chimney down. And that's $6,000. Third guy. He said, well, sound. He said, come on, that's old hat. We use video. We use infrared. I said, you drop a camera down? He said, we do. I said, well, that sounds wonderful. I said, and you always find where it is using this infrared. He said, well, no, not always. I said, well, why not? He said, it's dark in there. There's one guy left, and he's a CCS. Some of you with initials know what this means. He's a certified chimney specialist. And I call him and he says, listen, so let me ask you a couple of questions first. I said, fine. He said, did you do any renovations in the last few months in the house? I said, yeah, we did. We did some differences down here in the family room and, leading into the kitchen and so on. We did. How did you know that? He said, well, would that have changed your air conditioning and your flow in general, airflow? I said, I think it did. I know they changed some ducts and intake and stuff like that. I said, my God, this is the Great Kreskin. He says to me, you don't have a leak. You have a pressure problem. He said, and there's too much pressure pushing down and not enough to allow the smoke to rise. I said, can you fix that? He said, of course, but it's very expensive. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you need a fan up on the top of the chimney, an exhaust fan. It'd be a switch in your closet. You can turn it on whenever you light a fire. It'll suck up the smoke and the residue. I said, how expensive? He said, well, they're custom made for each chimney. It's $1,200. I said, how soon can you get here? I said, wait a minute. That doesn't explain the smoke coming out of the light receptacles. He said, sir, smoke rises. It doesn't fall. The smoke's coming out of your chimney. You're just seeing it burst when it hits the light. I said, I knew that.